that we learned from him, and the love that he shared for us. Our family was able, fortunately,
We're good.
Yes, sir.
Dave, really appreciate your time here. What's the last week been like?
About family, Jim. Just great remembrances, of a life well lived. Having 90 years with him, and just all the great lessons that we learned from him, and the love that he shared for us. Our family was able, fortunately, the restrictions on travel had loosened up enough to where our family could all make it into town. And then I spent the week preparing for the services on Thursday and Friday, the viewing, and then the funeral mass, and then entombment. And frankly, you and I had talked earlier that the fact that by law it had to be a private ceremony really saved us a lot of probably wrenching decisions when it came time to deciding who couldn't come to the services. So the fact that it was just family in the church, and just made it special. And then we're very much in favor and want to allow South Florida to be able to celebrate his life when the time is appropriate, and people can gather safely, and and the Dolphins and I know the Archdiocese of Miami are all in favor of that, and would like to are planning tentatively, as much as anybody can plan any gatherings these days, an opportunity to celebrate his life.
So many people last Monday, Dave, when I spoke to them about your dad, the word that kept coming up over and over was integrity and doing things the right way. Can you elaborate on that, what that meant to him?
In my talk at the service for my dad, there were 4 generations of our family there, and I wanted my grandsons and his great-grandsons, my sister's kids, that maybe didn't quite understand, my brother's daughters, maybe they didn't quite understand, why it was such a big deal. Why is there so much attention being spent on him? And it's just not about how many games that he won. It's the way he went about doing it. And to your point, integrity. And the points that I brought up were, first of all, he was a man of faith. But though he was very devout in his beliefs, he was very accepting of other people's beliefs. And that's an important lesson, these days. And then honesty, how much that meant to him in being straightforward to people. And I'm sure you experienced it like I experienced at times, anybody that was around him, and it wasn't any different with family. Sometimes you didn't like where you stood at the particular moment, but you were held accountable, and then it was over, and you moved on. I heard a great story from Chris Mortensen, renowned ESPN reporter who came in to interview him, and he said that he told the cameraman to wait, and he then reamed Chris Mortensen for having written an article that was critical of me back when I was coaching. And then when he finished, he said to the cameraman, "Okay, let's begin," and everything was fine after that. And that was a great example of how he could put things behind him, but he was going to speak his mind and be honest. The next trait I talked about was trust, how important that was to him. If you're honest and you build that trust over a period of time with people. And examples of that were, the way that he treated different people, over time. The Bob Griese's and the Larry Zonkas and the Bob Kuchenbergs and Larry Littles and, the great players that he could trust. He would give them a little bit more leeway than he might guys that he couldn't trust. Respect and how important that was to him to make sure that he was very respectful of all the people, no matter who they were around him. and then of course of the rules. We're doing it the right way. His teams were always the least penalized. He was on the rules committee in the NFL, and he lived his life that way. I made a comment to one of the articles last week that were written about him, about the fact that it was not even close that he was ever in the crime section of the sports page. And then his drive, his competitive drive, to want to win, and of course doing it in the right way, but wanting to win. Just so many great stories. Mike Westhoff, great Dolphin, special team coach, and great NFL special team coach over the years, called me and we talked yesterday, and he related a story about how one of the scouts right before the draft said, "Coach, well, it looks like we've wrapped things up. The hay is in the barn." This is like 24 hours before the draft started. And he went off. The hay is never in the barn. And, there's always another rock to be, turned over. And so that relentless drive for perfection. And when you thought you were there was always something more you could do. And then finally being a lifelong learner, and how, he believed that change was inevitable. You had to embrace that, and what better example is the way that the Dolphins won in the 70s with the ground game, and Zonka kick and Morris and Bob Greasy throwing the ball 5 to 10 times a game.
And then here comes Marino.
And then Marino comes in, and seeing the talent there, and I was fortunate to be a part of that. When Dan was drafted in 1983, and on the offensive staff, and saw him say, "Okay, it's the same playbook, but we're going to go to this section now, not that section." and just seeing right from the beginning, that we had a special talent, and how what we needed to change to do that. And here's a guy that had won Super Bowls and coached the team to perfection, and he being a defensive player and a defensive-minded guy overall, embracing wide open, throw it 50 times a game, type of philosophy, and that said a lot about him. And then in his personal life, I concluded with the fact that our mom died at an early age of 57. And a few years later, he found love again, and in Marianne, and embraced her family, and melded our family with her family, and with her 3 children, and now their children, and was able to embrace change in that way also. So, being somebody that was set in his ways, but also willing to adapt and change.
I'll tell you the impression I always had with your dad, and you and Mike especially, and this was just an impression, because your dad was such an enormous presence, and sometimes for kids, that's a tough thing to live up to. And like you're in this big shadow. But I never had a feeling that was a problem for you or Mike. Am I right or wrong there?
No, you're right. I never felt like I had to be around and do things. And I look back now at how we've raised our 3 sons, and now we have 3 grandsons, and I appreciate the fact that he wanted us around as much as we could be, and as much as my sisters could be. Although he was coaching a pretty male-dominated sport at the time, so and you could just sense his enthusiasm when we were around. Even as young guys, I remember, a real treat for me as when I was 5, 6, 7 years old was when we were still in Baltimore, to be able to go and spend a few days with him at training camp. And then when we moved down here, I was turning 11, and my summer jobs were working, as a ball boy, water boy, painting the fields. He didn't have the big systems they have now, and he, I think, enjoyed seeing me there. And I know my mom enjoyed it because, with the 5 of us, she was happy to have one out of the nest. But nobody really did embrace that, and with Mike as well. And so I never had a second thought about, following in the footsteps, so to speak. And we always knew that, no matter what you did, people were going to say, "Oh, he got this job because of he's a Shula. And, I mean, that would have been the same if I had gone on to be a lawyer, which at one point I thought it would. He wouldn't have gotten that opportunity, to get into law school if he wouldn't. We dealt with that our whole lives, and that was certainly, not a reason not to pursue your passion.
Yeah. You talked about the fact that because of the circumstances that we're in now, that it had to be family. And I mentioned in a report last week that no question generations of Dolphin players would have been there. And so many of them talked about they felt this sense of family that your dad had, and they've carried it on to their own families. How do you think that he, directly or indirectly, got that message across that family was number one?
Just how he treated people, Jim. It was right from day one. Before day one started in bringing players in, he wanted to know about their backgrounds, their high school, relationship with their high school coach, relationship with their college coach, their family, and wanted to know what kind of person was coming into the organization. And he cared about them as people. He was tough on them, but he truly cared about them as people. And I can't even begin to tell you the story. Mark Duper called me yesterday and told me that how much Dad had meant to him, and how he said, I'm sitting in a beautiful house in Louisiana right now, and that's because of your father. He took a chance on me. He goes, I didn't know anything about football when the Dolphins drafted me. I was a world-class track athlete, but I didn't know anything about football. And your dad saw that I had a talent, and was willing to spend the time to help me develop that, and then help me develop as a person now. And I had some trials and tribulations, but at the end of the day, I saw the message that he was sending, and it's helped me become the person that I am, and the family person that I am.
Interesting that you bring up Mark Duper. I mean, going back another generation, Larry Little, 1970, there's a whole different generation. Miami was a different place, coming out of a tough period in our history. And Larry Little made mention of the fact that when he was roomed with a guy who happened to be white, and that told him, okay, color's not an issue here, and it doesn't matter to the coach. And so that says something to me about him.
Yeah, that was one of the subtle moves that he made, that to him, there was no other way to do it. You're making up a rooming list for training camp, you're going to do it by position. That's all he thought about. And he never really talked about how significant that was down here in South Florida, as you mentioned. And Larry has said that to me as well. That was a great message, not only to him and to the football team, but also to the community that saw, how he was conducting himself. And, didn't matter what background you came from, you were on the team, you were a teammate. And that's a great lesson that team sports in general, but he, through being I don't know if you call it an innovator, but willing to disregard, what the norms had been, as you mentioned. And, when he came down here in 1970, it was still Miami, not Miami. And, unfortunately, as you mentioned, some of the racial segregation that still existed at that time, just coming off the Civil Rights Act in the early 60s. So that was a very monumental move that he made, but he would never talk about that. He just, what other way is there to do it?
Mm. Everybody knows what kind of coach he was, Dave. What kind of dad was he?
Jim, very little difference. That intensity that he showed on the field. Now, we didn't quite see that as much at home, thank goodness. But attention to detail, caring about us, wanting us to be the best that we could be. I gave at the service the example of him, doing it the right way. I remember he had given me the task of sweeping out and cleaning out the garage one day. And about a half an hour into it, he comes out into the garage and literally gave me a seminar on the proper broom stroke. I wasn't getting quite enough dirt out at one time. You were going to do it the right way, and but then again, it was to help me. It wasn't trying to be mean or whatever. But and then he was of the generation that, there wasn't a lot of hugging and telling you I love you and all that. It was that came through our mom. She was, I call her the great communicator. But we always knew through her, if he wasn't physically there, how much he cared. And then we would hear stories of how I've heard from a couple of members of the media that said guys that work for the Dolphins, the PR guys for the Dolphins, Harvey Green and Chip Namias, part of their jobs on Saturdays was finding out what the Dartmouth score was or what the Alabama score was when I was playing and Mike was playing, and then with me coaching the Bengals, and then Mike when he had been at other places, how were our teams doing, even before he prepared himself to go into his own press conferences. So and that you knew that he cared. We knew that he cared, and he just wanted the best for us, and suffered when things didn't go well, and was very happy when they did.
You knew that he cared even when you had to coach against him.
Look back, we had two opportunities. I believe that's still the only time a father and son have coached against each other in professional sports. And very busy week, a lot of attention on the game. And but as a head coach, you're immersed in preparation. And I remember I paused during the national anthem. Standing there in a moment of quiet before the ball game, kicked off, and it was scanning the other sideline, and happened to catch his eye, and that's right. I know that guy.
Wow.
And that gives me chills now to think about that.
And the moment after the games was even more.
Yeah, it was the first game. I think we were close at halftime, and they beat us pretty good in the second half. The second game, it came down to we scored too early. Danny, had a chance, and one of the early plays, I still swear his knee touched the end zone when we pushed him down. That should have been a safety and game over. And then they hit a 4th down and 11 at sideline, a comeback right in front of me. And back then they had the turf in Riverfront Stadium in Cincinnati, and you could see imprints, so the guy's foot was halfway on the line, literally inches in front of me. And I'm pointing at it with the official, and he comes over and he goes, "Catch!" And I almost lost my mind. And there were no replay at the time. But so anyways, they go on and score. And then we end up getting the ball and missing a field goal at the end that would have won. So it was an emotional ball game. I'd held it together, I think, pretty well, shaking his hand after the game, and then going in and talking to the team and to the media. And then we had an opportunity before they left on the buses to meet in a private room, and it was just my wife Leslie, my dad and his wife Marianne, and Mr. Huizinga and his wife Marty. And I walked in and just lost it, and he put his arm around me, and he knew how much it meant. So it was a special moment.
And it's still special to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. He had a sense of humor, too, that a lot of people didn't get a chance to see. I'm sure you saw it much more than me. In fact, when he first met my wife, ironically, they had the same birthday, January 4th. And so I introduced her, and then she walked away, and he looked at me and he said, "Yeah, Barry, you ought to kick your coverage."
Yeah.
What kind of humorous moments do you remember? I mean, there must be so many.
Oh, geez. With the family, and then Bob Greasy became basically part of our family. And I know I love to hear the story when they were teeing off to play golf, and Bob, a terrific golfer, just missed one, and it goes about 6 inches off the tee, and my dad, without missing a beat, he just said, "Bob, you used to quarterback sneak farther than that." He had a great wit about him. Toward the end, I had come down during the Christmas holidays, and we were sitting out on his back porch, and which overlooks Biscayne Bay, and it was a beautiful afternoon, and a seagull flew by. And I said, "Dad, look at that, you have the same color hair as that seagull." And without missing a beat, he looks at me and he rubs his hand through his hair and he goes, you know, at least I still have my hair. So, yeah, he had a wry sense of humor and kept it right, you know, to the end.
A lot of guys may coach in a city, but when their coaching time is up, they're out of Dodge. Your dad made South Florida his home. What did South Florida grow to mean to him?
It was home, as you said. You know, so many great years, so many great memories. And, you know, I'd like to thank the Dolphins, you know, first Mr. Huizenga and then Mr. Ross, you know, and everybody that's been a part of the Dolphins and how they embraced him and through the years and made him feel special and a part of it. You know, bringing the new hire head coaches down to meet him and making sure that they understood, you know, how important it was for them to have a relationship with Don Shula and wanting to tap into his knowledge and abilities to help mentor, you know, young coaches, and that meant a tremendous amount to him. And then how he had, you know, he got early. He understood early on in the profession that at the end of the day, it was entertainment, and that the fans were so important. And I can honestly say that in all the times that we were out socially, that I never saw him be mean or short with anybody that came up to him. And sometimes it was literally in the course of, you know, put in between, you know, an autograph piece of paper for an autograph in between the fork going in his mouth. And, you know, he would pause and, oh, thanks for coming over. What's your name? And he'd sign and was always very patient. And that was just a small sign of what the community meant to him. And then, you know, I can't even begin to count the number of charities that he has supported and different causes and really embraced South Florida and wanted to help make it be as a better place.
Mm. What's the message from the Shula family, Dave, to all of South Florida that has reached out to you during this difficult time?
Yeah, just thank you so much for your condolences and the outpouring of sentiment and grief and how, you know, everybody is mourning his loss and the fact that he won't be there anymore means so much to us. And, you know, he was our dad, obviously, and we, but we always knew that he was part of a bigger family than ours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, he certainly, you know, lived a life of great example.
He did. He did. It was, there was nothing, and I think if you asked any of his players, you know, there wasn't anything that he would ask them to do that he hadn't done himself or couldn't, you know, do himself at different stages. You know, I saw a photo the other day of, you know, back in the days when he could lead. He was leading calisthenics and on the ground doing, you know, up downs and running gassers with the guys after, and so they know he had been in the trenches and that he would be in there again if he could.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for this time, Dave. You know, I can see that your family is defined by love, and you know, love has that beautiful side of it, and you know, this is the side of it that is difficult. But you know, I know, I'm just speaking personally. When I lost my mom a couple of years ago, that I kept telling myself, you know what, it's worth it to hurt now because of what we had.
Right.
And I have a sense that you feel the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. We were blessed to have him for 90 years. He had a great run, and the finality is tough, but we know he's in a better place. And you know, I had Jerry Sandusky, who John Sandusky's son,
Jerry.
You know, legendary line coach, and Jerry's up in Baltimore, still involved in sports like you are, and he called me last week, and I said, Jerry, you know what's going on right now, right? And he goes, what's that? He goes, well, up in heaven right now, they're doing inside run drill. And Dad is yelling at your dad because the offensive lineman missed a block. And then he's yelling at Carl Tassif because the back took the wrong hole. And then he's yelling at Mo Scary, the D-line coach, because the D-lineman filled the wrong gap. And he's yelling at Bill Arnsparger because the linebacker, put his head on the wrong side on the tackle. So, and they're having a great time.
Right.
So, he's in a better place.
Yeah.
And that's very comforting.
Amen. Dave, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Let me get a garage and I forget it. So I said, tell you what, either we get you a condo here in Chicago, you stay where you lived the whole life, or if you like, why don't you go with my wife Cheryl to Memphis and see what that's about, whatever. So so I came back here to South Florida to start working again. She went with Cheryl to Memphis, and she came back and said, okay, what do you want to do? She says, I think I want to move. I mean, my jaw dropped because I didn't really think that she would want to leave, But it turned out to be the best thing for her. She spent the last 20 years of her life there.
Oh, great.
And she and my mother-in-law and an aunt who since passed, they became like the Golden Girls.
Oh, wow.
And they had a great time. And so so the last few years when it got a little more difficult for her to get around, and she lived in an ALF, and like her. And so my brother-in-law went to see her, and he couldn't really get her to respond to much. And so long story short, that's when I dropped everything and flew down there and got in the hospital the last 3 weeks. And she had a little fits and starts, but she never really quite got herself back. Oh, Dave, no, but it's still not an easy thing,
No. How about your wife's folks?
My mother-in-law still.
She on her own? And
she lives, well, one of my brother-in-laws lives with her.
Oh, okay.
And only the last couple of years as she started to.
That I could see because I've been gone the last few years, and but it's
But
if you don't.
The last time I was over, you were going to your dad.
When was that? Special spot, as anybody that knows.
Yeah. Where's Mike now?
So Mike's a Broncos quarterback
that's
coach.
what I thought,
Yeah. So he's in transition, and he had felt a little bad for him that. So Sunday, I talked to my dad Sunday morning, and I could tell that things were, he was struggling breathing. I called Mike right away and said, Mike, you should give Dad a call, and didn't sound too good. And he tried to call later, and he couldn't get through. Now he talked to him, I think, within the last week, but so he had flown back to New Jersey as one of his daughter's birthdays, and